Hello, my name is Brett Bendistis, and welcome to Bluebook Crash Course. This is a video lecture series that's aimed at making Blue Book citations easier. Not easy, just easier in the context of like academic and practical legal pursuits, meaning that the goal here is to not make Blue Booking as easy as the shortcuts that you may hope it to be, but to teach you like individual steps to make sure that you can do it without any help. Again, the proverb I love about Blue Booking is the slower you do something, the faster it goes. And that's the goal here today, specifically what we're talking about here, which is reported citations. So we're going to talk about reported cases and how to cite them in clear and accurate Blue Book form. Now, I have my 21st edition of the Blue Book here. We're going to use a few different sections here. So if you can have something that either tabs or dog ears the pages, I think that'll be really helpful. But I want to make sure anytime you're doing Blue Book citations, you have a copy of this bad boy right here to make sure it's there. Now, a few things I want to note about Blue Book citations that are going to apply with everything. Right, we're going to cover three different types of Blue Book citations: the full citation form, the longer citation form, and the shorter citation form. Now, the full citation form, I think, takes the most oxygen when it comes to citing, meaning that it's the kind of thing that contains the most amount of information, the most amount of work, but you only do it once. Now, the thing about full citations when it comes to the Blue Book form is that there are a lot of like bells and whistles with making sure it's right, but then once you do it one time, it's done and you never do it again, right? The longer citation form is used anytime after the full citation form. So like you do the full citation form once, and then you're doing one of the two longer citation forms. The longer citation form is used when the last thing you've cited is not the same thing. The shorter citation form is when the last thing you cited is the same thing, right? So you cite a case, and then you cite something different. This case, the second case, uses the longer citation form. If you cite the same case after that sentence, it's the shorter citation form. All this will make more sense later. The key thing is that the shorter citation form is always ID period, either underlined or italicized, not both. The thing about id that I want to note before we get into how to use it is that it is your friend. It is not a problem. Using id over and over again just shows that you've got a really great case, and there's no negative or pejorative connotation for using id. So again, it is fine, right? The longer citation form, and I want to get this out early and often, I don't think is that hard, personally. I know that's easy to say as someone who's like a practicing legal methods teacher, but it is something where more people get this wrong than anything else when I test Blue Book citations. And I don't know why. I don't think it's like overly complex, but I do tend to think that it's got a couple tricks and nuances that are worth getting into. So I just want to point out from the very beginning, don't neglect the longer citation form because it's important and it's not impossible, right? But with a little bit of energy, you should be able to make it and make it work. Now, we're covering today reported citation forms. Now, reported citation forms is an important thing to note for current law students and lawyers because you have a different relationship with the law library and the internet than my generation. We're in the generation before me. I graduated law school in 2007, and so I was like in early high school when the internet started to like take over the world. So the internet is not ubiquitous to me in that it was always there, but I also don't think that the reliance on the internet that is true today is the same thing when I was in academic environments. And so I think it's important to note that reported cases don't have the same connotation they did 20 to 30 years ago. Reporters are essentially just books that contain cases, and they contain them in chronological order. There's a whole different legal research component of this at a later point. But again, prior to my class in law school, most legal research was done in the library. People did use Lexis and Westlaw, but it was sort of still transitioning. I worked for a judge who had no idea how to use Westlaw or Lexis. He had a book of cases, and that's what he used primarily. He was 75 years old, so there's a different time period there. But the thing about reporters is like reporters were the common way that lawyers would do legal research. And so Blue Book citations are based on that period of time, not the current period of time. And so in a lot of ways, it's a little bit thinking about like studying film, but starting your studying process using like VHS technology or like DVDs, something that just isn't really used the same way that we think about the way we use movies now. And so when we talk about reporters, it's easy to be like, well, I don't know what it is. I'm just going online. But I want to absolve you from that. I want you to think about it a little bit more critically. West reporters in general are a publisher of books, right? So the reporters that you're going to see in the library, and so this is for Delaware law students, but you can do this at any law library. I want you to take like 2 seconds out of your day. The next time you're on campus, I want you to go in the front door of the library. I want you to make a right, go through the arches, and you're going to see on the right-hand side just shelves of books. And I believe it's the Atlantic Reporter first, right? The West Reporters are essentially organized, and you can see that the books on the shelf have numbers on the spine, and that the reporters have usually 3 to 4 series. So it's 1 to 999 is series 1, 1 to 999 is series 2, ideally 1 to 999 is series 3, and so on and so forth. But you need to know the series, and you need to know the volume number to understand how they work. Now, West Reporters generally are organized by region. The Atlantic Reporter are states that, are next to the Atlantic Ocean, right? But you have the Southeast Reporter, you have the Southern Reporter, you have like the Northern Reporter, all Northwest Reporter, all these things, right? The key thing is that the West Reporter, and this is the most important thing I think you need to know, is a little fancier. So it got a little bit of cachet to it. Usually it's thought of because there's a collection of states in individual ones, the West Reporter has a little bit more prestige than other reporters. And that's still kind of true. I had it was Take Your Child to Work Day. I brought my son to the law library to go see 3 cases that I've had that are in the Atlantic Reporter. I pulled a book off the shelf and I was like, look, your dad's in this like amazing library. And I want you to think about that story when you think about the West Reporter. Like, I, as a practicing lawyer, think it's impressive enough that I have 3 cases in the Atlantic Reporter that I would show that to my son. The reason I bring that up is that when you can cite the West Reporter, I think you should. I think it gives, again, you're not going to win or lose a case, but if you've got a good case that shows the Atlantic Reporter or the West Reporter or whatever jurisdiction you're in, gives you like a little bit more punch, right? So the West Reporters are the most important in the context of the law. You also have state and court reporters that are usually broken up by state or individual court. For example, there's a Delaware Reporter, but there also used to be a Delaware Chancery Court Reporter, which are, again, chronological cases just in that court or just in that state. This isn't true for all states, but I think a lot of states have done away with the state reporter, or at least haven't put the same level of reliance on it. Pennsylvania, I still believe, relies a lot on state reporters, but Delaware less so. You don't really see a lot of state reporters with current cases. They're mostly unreported cases, which we'll get to in a little bit. So the key thing about West reporters and state reporters is that ultimately you have to distinguish which one you want to use and when you want to use it and why. I personally use the West Reporter primarily. Then I'll use the State Reporter, depending on the jurisdiction, and then I use the unreported citation form last. The Blue Book does put a priority in where you want to use it. So if you go to the table of the state, they'll tell you which jurisdiction you should usually use. Again, I found that normally it's the West, but you want to double check, and I'll show you where to find that. The key thing being now is we're only covering reported decisions, books that hypothetically you could find in the library. Now, the good news about citations, I know I'm cutting off a little bit, but I'm not cutting off anything really relevant, is that this is a sample New Jersey case called Haynes versus First National State Bank, okay? You see this is an exact replica of the citation that's going to be on Lexis. So again, you've got the name of the court, you've got court information, you have reporter, and then you have all the parties that are abbreviated, right? So this is exactly what you're going to see. All the information you need to know for a full citation form is right here. And how do you organize this? And what are some easy rules to think about? Okay, now, when in doubt with Blue Book citations, my suggestion is go to Microsoft Word and put 1, 2, 3, right? Number your list, 1, 2, and 3, okay? The reason why I suggest doing this is that if you can isolate the name of the parties, the reporter information, and the court and the year, all you have to do is then delete the numbers, put the whole thing together, and that gives you like a little bit of training wheels when doing the Blue Book citations. It puts it in the order that you're looking for. I also think that if you can isolate each individual step, I think it makes sense, right? You think about, like, I'm teaching my kids how to swim. I'll throw my kids in the pool and be like, oh, turn your head, move your arms, move your legs. It's like, teach them how to move their legs first, then you teach them how to move their arms, then you teach them how to breathe. And so a lot of what we're doing here is just individual step by step to make sure it works. Does it take more time? It absolutely takes more time, but it's a lot better than trying to mimic something that you don't understand. Looking into, I had a student who recently was like, oh, I look at the cases and I just try to make it look the same. I don't want you to have to do that. You shouldn't have to do that, right? And so that's the key thing that we're covering here. So what I have is the individual sections and how they're important, and some really important tables and rules that you can look up to double check, right? So the first thing I want to remind you is that if you go to your Blue Book, right, and you go to the table of contents, page X, Roman numeral X, it's like the 10th page, you'll see Rule 10, which are cases there. Now, one other thing I also want to note about Blue Book citations is that if you have samples from a professor or anybody, or even this video, use those samples, right? You look at your version when you're done and look at the samples we have here. If they don't look like the samples from professional lawyers, you might be wrong. And I think that's an important thing to note because if you're wrong, you can always double check it and you can make sure it works. Cool. So what do we have to do first? The first thing you have to do is you have to give the name of the parties, the name of the parties. Now, the name of the parties is important for a few different reasons, and I want to ask you a few very easy questions, all right? The first thing to note about the name of the parties, it is the first plaintiff versus the first defendant. First plaintiff, first defendant. Okay, now, I recognize you could hypothetically look at the top of this citation, but let's not rely on Lexis if we don't have to. Let's learn why things are the way they are before we jump into things too quickly. Right? The first plaintiff is Richard D, or the plaintiff in general is Richard D. Haynes and Charles E. Haynes, plaintiff appellants, versus First National State Bank of New Jersey, trustee on an irrevocable trust agreement, and First State National Bank. You've got Dorcas Cotsworth in there. You've got Gainsbury. You know all these people, right? So anyway, a lot of plaintiffs and a great deal of defendants. Okay, now we're going to isolate that to first plaintiff, first defendant. I want you to ask yourself this really quick question. Are these people humans or non-humans? Are they humans or are they non-humans? Now take your best guess of whether Richard D. Haynes is a human or a non-human. It's a human, right? So humans, we abbreviate to their last names. That's just Haynes. You see that at the top. All right, easy enough. Just Haynes, right? We look at the next one, First National State Bank. Okay, is that a human or a non-human? I think you can all assume that is a non-human. So here's what we do when we've got non-humans. We're going to turn to table 6 of your blue book. Now, table 6 is located on page 304. I want you to tab that page, right? Now, 304 gives you words that need to be abbreviated when you're dealing with non-humans. Now, the rule here is easy. If you see the word, you have to abbreviate it. If you don't see the word, you don't abbreviate it, right? So if you look at it, is first here. First is not here, so it's not abbreviated. If you look at national, turn the page, you can see national is abbreviated. I'll take a second, take a beat so you can see that. National is NAT''L, so we abbreviate that. You look for state. State is not here, we don't abbreviate it. Bank is not here, we don't abbreviate it. So when you see at the top, Haynes v. First National State Bank, that's the only thing you need to do. That's the first parties that we need at the very beginning here. Now, the key thing I want to note, I have a few different nuances I'm going to add here. First off, the parties is either underlined or italicized, and it's not all caps, right? First letter's capitalized, but we're not capitalizing everything. And there's one mandatory comma at the end of that. So it's first plaintiff, lowercase v period, first defendant, comma, everything's underlined or italicized. As a starting point, I would suggest that if you're new to this, do underline because you can kind of see that a little bit easier. Make sure you don't forget it. It's really, really important. It's the kind of easy thing that someone who doesn't know a lot about blue booking will immediately notice the problem, whereas like other small things you can maybe like slip under. But everyone knows, every lawyer or judge at least knows that those need to be formatted in that specific way. The next point is the reporter information. And the number one thing I want to note here is you're just copying what's being provided for you. If I go back here, right, you can see up in this top corner, right where it says reporter, you see it bold-faced, underneath it's 87 NJ 163, 432 A.2D 890, and then you see 1981 NJ Lexus 1668. Now, why is this important? The 87 NJ 163 is the state reporter. That's the New Jersey state reporter. The 432 A.2D 890 is the West reporter. And how do you know that? Well, a few different ways you know it. State reporter has a state abbreviation in the middle. Normally when you see like A.2D, NE.2D, SO.3D, like the directions that don't match the name of the court or the name of the state, that's when you usually know that's the West reporter, just to note it. You'll also note that the asterisks by the state reporter usually will correspond with bracketed page numbers within the document that normally will have one asterisk and that number, or two asterisks here with two numbers later. I'm going to show that in the next video just to make sure that those page numbers are clearly defined. The key thing is that you'll just take that information, you'll put it right in the document. So I'm going to use the West reporter here, 432 A.2D 890. Now what that shows ultimately is that if you went to the library, you found the Atlantic reporter, you'd first go to the second series, A.2D. If it was 3D, it'd be the third series. If it's just A dot, that's the first series. Great, that one's easy. 432 is the volume number, 890 is the first page number, right? So if you're looking for page numbers, you also want them to correspond with that page number 890. So if you go in the middle of the document, you see 899, you know that's the page number that corresponds with that volume, right, or that reporter. Unlike if you saw like 171, which would probably correspond with the state reporter, right? So again, these are things that we just want to know. Now, the key thing I want to note for the full citation, do not abbreviate this ever. Include both of them in there. Don't change it. That has to stay the same all the time. Okay, so that's a key thing I want to note first off. All right, now we've covered the first two sections, name of the parties, the reported information. The last one is the court information and the year. Again, people forget this sometimes. Don't forget the brackets at the end have to be included. It's a formatting thing, which I'll show you in a second. The key thing being first is that this is where the tables are the most important thing. So I want you to turn to table 1, which is on 227. This is a federal jurisdiction where we know that we're dealing with a state case because this is the New Jersey State Court. So we're going to instead turn now to page 242, which is table 1.3. You're going to tab or fold this over. This is like the most important table in the entire book. Now, what you're going to see when you look here at Alabama, you're going to see courts with abbreviations. You're going to see a statutory compilation later, which we'll cover in another video. Key thing that I want to note here is if you look at Alabama, the Alabama Supreme Court, in the boldface Supreme Court, the parentheses is the court abbreviation. Underneath that are the reporter informations. So you see that Alabama is in the Southern Reporter or the Alabama Reports, and those are the reporters that report cases from that court, right? So what we're looking for is New Jersey. So we're going to turn to New Jersey in the book, and it's alphabetical, so it should be pretty quick. New Jersey is going to be on 269, and you see the New Jersey Supreme Court here, right now. I like to ask this question to my students, and I recognize that you're in a video. But if I asked you, how do you think you'd abbreviate the Supreme Court of New Jersey? Most people will say N.J. which is fine. If I was like, I'll bet your life of what abbreviation is, I still think people would be like, it's probably N.J. which is fine, right? What if I ask you about Pennsylvania? Is Pennsylvania PA, or is it P.A. or is it PENN, right? Would you bet your life that you know how the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania is abbreviated? You might not. And so I know that your life does not depend on your Blue Book citation abbreviations, but people are going to know if you're not paying attention. And they know if you don't take the extra 2 seconds to look in the book. And it's also something that when you start abbreviating in one jurisdiction over and over again, I mean, most people practice in 1 to 2 jurisdictions. Yeah, you start memorizing. I know all the abbreviations for Delaware because like I've been in Delaware, but I don't remember them in Pennsylvania. So when I have to do that, I do break open my Blue Book, and it takes all of 30 seconds to get the answer right. And that's the key. Being right. 2 extra seconds to make sure it's correct. And so you see the New Jersey Supreme Court, you note that it is N.J., which is important. You also note the year here up the upper corner is 1981. And so if we look at our citation form, this is ultimately what we have. Haynes v. First National State Bank, comma, underlined. You have the reporter information, and then in parentheses, court, and then year. Perfect. That's the only time you have to do it. That's it, right? The other point I want to note is sometimes you're going to need to do pinpoint citations. Now, pinpoint citations note the page number that you have to use to include it within, to show the reader where you got the page. Now, again, I want to note something. This isn't like citing, a dissertation on human anatomy, right? Where you're like, I don't know where this stuff is. Normally these cases at most are like 30 pages, right? But a lot of cases are like 10. Right? And normally if you've cited a rule of law, that rule of law should be pretty easy to find again, right? Just look for the paragraph that has all the citations. So I know that citations, again, it's a nominal amount of effort, but it's the kind of effort that people look for. So I want you to take the approach, like you're going to take the extra second to include the pinpoint citation. Now, when you do that, you put a comma after the first page number, and then you include the pinpoint citation. You don't replace it. So once again, 432 A.2D 890 never changes. Cool? So whenever you're kind of making direct points to things, make sure you include the pinpoint citations because they are important. This is the shorter citation form, so I apologize. I don't want to record the whole video again, so I'm going to be fine with it. This is the shorter citation form. What you see here is that, like you see this sentence here that cites Haynes, and then the next sentence cites Haynes. The citation form is just id. ID period, we underline the id. If it's a different page, so here would be 897. If this was 890, it would be id at 890. But id's your friend, and it's always underlined. All right, so that one's easy. The longer citation form, you'll see that we cite Haynes versus First National State Bank. Then we're citing In re Rittenhouse's will, and then we're back to Haynes. To me, this is the longer citation form that I think people struggle with. But again, I want to note that it doesn't have to be quite as difficult as I think it might seem. So the rule is essentially what we do is we include the first plaintiff, right? The volume, the book abbreviation at the pinpoint citation number. Now I want to note something. If you take the full citation form and then you just delete V till the comma, and then after A.2D, you delete everything and then put at and then the page number, that does make it a little bit easier, right? Just makes it like a little bit easier to put things together where you don't have to always do it from scratch, where you can sort of cut and paste the full citation, make a few edits, and then you've got it there. The other thing is that, like, if you're starting and you're writing something, I find that, sometimes legal writing is like putting a puzzle together, right? You have a sentence, and you're like, oh, I kind of want this sentence here. I think this is more effective. The narrative of your rules is so important. And so when you start writing and you start a draft, a suggestion I might make for you is just every citation is the full citation form. Every citation. So I'm always a proponent of citing while you write. Cite while you're writing something. That way you're not trying to go back and find everything later. But only cite the full citation form. And then later, when you're done, you change the ids and these forms a little bit later, and that makes it a little bit more simple. That way, if you have to move things around, you don't have to worry about changing the short forms, and it lets you see it a little bit better. Sound good? So again, short form, longer form, full citation form, those are the keys. Now, if I go back here, my email address is right here. If you have any questions, you're always free to email me. You can find other videos like this on YouTube, and my podcast is right here on the United States Supreme Court. I'll be back with more videos, one on unreported citation form, and then locating embedded page numbers within the document. We're going to cover that as well in the next lecture video. So thank you very much. And again, I hope you enjoyed the video.